The girl in the cowboy hat who made a rancher forget everything. The deed was on the table. I remember that more than anything, the way it sat there in the lamplight, corners brown from handling, like something that had been worried over 100 times and looked exactly that way. My name on it. 41 years of my name on it. And I was about to sign the other half of that name onto a bill of sale. That was the night she came through the door. Not walked in, came through, the way weather comes through a gap you forgot to seal. Hat first, a flat-brimmed, beat-up tan thing with a crease down the center that no proper woman would own. Then the rest of her, shaking rain off her coat sleeve like it had inconvenienced her personally, looking around my front room the way a person looks around a room they're deciding whether to trust. I didn't know her name yet. I didn't know much of anything for a minute. Her horse had thrown a shoe out on the Cutter Creek Road, she said. 2 miles in the dark with lightning moving south. She wanted to know if she could wait out the storm. Not could she sleep here, not could she use the barn, just wait out the storm, and she said it standing very straight, like she'd rehearsed the exact line that wouldn't put her in anyone's debt. I said yes and went to make coffee, and when I came back she was looking at the deed. Not reading it exactly, just looking at it, and she looked up at me without embarrassment, which caught me. Most people, you catch them near a thing they shouldn't be near, they step back. She just looked at me steady. "That's a ranch deed," she said. "It is. And that's a bill of sale next to it." "Also correct." She looked at the papers another second, then at the room, at the framed surveys on the wall, at the fire, at the particular way everything in a working man's house is placed for use and not for looking at, and she sat down in the chair across from mine without being asked. Her name was Clara Birch. She told me that when the coffee was between us and the rain was going hard at the windows. Her father had ranched 20 miles north near the Pine Breaks until he died in the spring. She'd been handling his debts since April. She said it plain, the way you say a thing you've gotten used to carrying. I told her my name, Elia's Drum. She said she'd heard of the drum place. That surprised me more than it should have. I'd been here long enough that I'd stopped expecting anyone to have heard of it. You get to a certain point in a life, a certain long stretch of working without much notice, and you start to believe the work is invisible. I don't know exactly when I started to believe that. Sometime after my wife died, maybe. Sometime in the years after, when I kept going because the cattle needed feeding, and the fence needed mending, and there was no reason to stop that wasn't also just a reason to sit down and not get up again. I'd been keeping the place on wire and stubbornness for 3 years. The winter before had broken most of what I'd built back, and I'd gone to the bank in Cutter Creek and come home with a number I couldn't make work. The bill of sale was for Harlan Wick, who ran cattle east of me and who had never once in 30 years of neighboring said a single kind word about my herd or my fencing or my land, and who I knew for a fact had been waiting for something to go wrong for me. I sat with that knowledge while I wrote his name on the paper. It tasted the way you'd expect. Clara Birch sat in my front room until the rain eased past midnight. We didn't talk the whole time. Some of it we just listened to the storm. She'd found a survey map on the shelf, one I'd drawn myself 20 years back, every fence line, every spring, every improvement, and she looked at it a long while in the lamp light. "You did this," she said. "Survey work in the early years, had to know what I had." She studied it, the care of it, I think, more than the details. Someone had taken a long time with that map. Someone had wanted to know the land exactly. "You have springs marked I've never seen marked on county maps," she said. "They're real springs." "I know they are," she looked up. "Harlan Wick knows it too." I didn't say anything. "My father and Wick had dealings," she said. "Wick has a way of finding a man at his lowest and offering exactly what makes it worse." She set the map down and looked at me directly. "What does he want your place for?" It wasn't really a question. She'd already put it together. The springs. The access they gave to the grazing on the benchland above, land that was technically county but that fed whoever held the water. Wick had been trying to corner that grazing for a decade. My place was the last piece. I told her that. She nodded once, quiet for a moment. "Don't sign it," she said. I looked at her. She was looking at the bill of sale on the table, and her jaw was set, and she looked angry, not at me, at the situation, at Wick, at the kind of men who circle the tired and the grieving and wait. I recognized that anger. I'd had it for years about other people's problems and somehow hadn't been able to turn it on my own. I don't have a lot of choices left, I said. You have the springs, she said. That's a choice. I want to be careful here about what happened next, because it would be easy to make it sound like she walked in and saved me in one night, and that's not how it was. What she did was something smaller and harder than that. She sat in my house until past midnight, and she looked at my problem the way she'd looked at that survey map. With attention, with a willingness to see what was actually there, without the layer of pity or dismissal or indifference that I'd gotten from everyone else I'd talked to in the previous 6 months. She said there might be a man in Cutter Creek, a lawyer named Freed who'd handled water rights cases before. She said if the springs were as she suspected, if they fed into the creek that ran through county grazing land, there might be an argument that selling them without county review was irregular. She said she didn't know for certain. She said it was worth finding out before I signed anything. She said I should sleep before I made a decision I couldn't unmake. Then she pulled her coat back on, settled her hat, and went out to check on her horse. I heard her in the barn for a bit, then quiet. I sat with the papers until about 2 in the morning. Then I put them in the drawer and went to bed. I rode to Cutter Creek in the morning, not to sign, to find Freed. He was a small, dry-voiced man in a cramped office above the feed merchant, and he listened to me for 20 minutes with his fingers laced on the desk, and then said, "Wick's been waiting for you to come in desperate. He told 2 men I know that he expected to have the drum place by Christmas." I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger exactly, something older than anger. The thing you feel when you've been working toward the same wall for years, and someone finally confirms the wall was always there. Freed said the springs were problematic for a straight sale. Not impossible, but problematic enough that a challenge could tie things up a long while. Long enough, maybe, to find other footing. He looked at me over his glasses and said, "You should have come in 6 months ago." "I know," I said. "Who told you to come now?" I told him about Clara Birch and the survey map and the rain. He nodded slowly, like it made sense to him in a way he didn't need to explain. I didn't see her again for 3 weeks. That stretch was some of the hardest I'd had. Not because things got worse, they didn't particularly, but because I'd been numb a long time and something had started to come back and a part of me didn't entirely trust it. Freed was working on the challenge. I was working on the cattle. The bill of sale stayed in the drawer. Wick sent a man out twice to ask when I intended to complete the transaction, and I sent the man back both times without answering. I thought about Clara Birch most days. Not in a soft way, I didn't have the energy for soft, but the way you think about something that changed the direction of a thing without any drama. A shim under a wagon wheel. A turn in a road you almost missed. She came back at the end of October. Came to buy hay, she said. She had 3 horses and was putting them up for winter at her father's old property, which she was working to either keep or sell depending on how the debts resolved. She was hauling herself, no hand to help. I helped her load. We didn't say much. She worked fast and without complaint, and when we were done, she looked at my fence line the way she'd looked at the survey map, like she was measuring. "You've kept it up," she said. 30 years of habit. She looked at me, not a long look, just a look, the particular kind where someone is deciding something. "Freed's a good man," she said. "If he's on it, it's worth waiting." "I know," I hesitated. "Thank you for that night." She moved her chin slightly, like she was dismissing a small debt. "I looked at the map and told you what I saw. That's not much." "It was enough," I said. She got up on the wagon, settled the reins, then she turned once more. "Elias," she said, the first time she'd used my given name, "you built a good place. Don't give it to a man who only wants it to hurt you with." Then she drove off down the road, and I stood there in the cold with the smell of cut hay in the air, and something in me that had been grinding gears for 3 years finally caught. The legal challenge held through the winter. Wick came to see me himself in November, first time he'd come to my door in years, and offered more money. I told him I wasn't selling. He looked at me for a long moment, the particular way a man looks at you when he's recalculating, and then he left. Freed found 2 other ranchers in the county willing to support the water rights position, which surprised me. I hadn't known they were watching. I hadn't known they cared one way or another what happened to the drum place. Freed said, more people were watching than I thought. I didn't entirely know what to do with that. Clara came for more hay in December. Then she came in January because her fence along the north break had come down in the ice storm, and I went to help restring it, and we worked 2 days in weather cold enough that your fingers stopped complaining after the first hour and just went quiet. She cooked that second night, something with beans and salt pork and a pan of cornbread that came out cleaner than anything I'd managed in years. We ate without much talk, and then she cleaned up and I watched the fire, and after a while she said, quietly, that she'd decided to keep her father's land. "The debts aren't resolved," she said, "but I'm closer than I was, and it's good land." She paused. "I'd rather fight for it than walk away and wonder." "Same," I said, and I meant more than I said, which I think she understood. She looked at me across the table. The lamp was between us, and the light was the low orange kind that makes a room feel its own size, no bigger. She looked at me the way she'd looked at that deed on the first night, direct, without pretense, deciding something. "I'll tell you something," she said. "I drove past your gate that night on purpose. I knew whose place it was. My father had spoken well of you. He said you were the kind of man who built things and maintained them and didn't make noise about it." She looked down at her hands. "My horse had thrown a shoe, that part was true, but I could have made it to the Ender's place, which was closer. I came here because I wanted to see the drum place for myself." I didn't say anything for a moment. "He said you'd been hard hit," she went on. "He said you'd had a bad winter and might lose it. He'd said that in the spring before he died. It had stayed with me." She looked up. "I don't want you to think it was anything but plain truth. I'm telling you because I think you deserve to know it plain. There are things you wait a long time to hear and don't know you're waiting until you hear them. I don't have better words for it than that. A man who built things and maintained them and didn't make noise about it. Her father had said that, and she had kept it, carried it the 20 miles and the months, and driven past the Ender's place in the rain to see for herself. I said, your father was a good judge. She smiled, small but real, the kind that means something was said right. Outside, the wind was picking up again. The horses in the barn shifted. The lamp gave the room that close, particular warmth of a hard winter outside and something worth having inside. I said, you could stay. The north room's clean. It's late and the road's going to ice. She looked at the window. She looked at me. All right, she said, simple as that. Not offering anything more than what it was, a woman making a sensible choice about the weather and a man she trusted enough to sleep under his roof. But the way she said it, all right, like it was easy, like I was a place a person could land without worry. That was the moment I felt it, what I hadn't felt in 3 years, what I'd stopped believing I'd feel again. Not happiness, exactly, simpler. The sense that the weight of the place was the right weight, that the work meant something, that there was a reason to maintain things. We married in the spring. Not a big ceremony. We were both past the age for ceremony. Just the preacher in Cutter Creek and 2 witnesses, and the ride home after with the land beginning to green up on either side of the road, and her hat brim tilting toward me in the wind. Freed had won the water rights challenge by then. Wick had backed off, moved his interest east. The drum place was still mine, clear. She brought her horses and her father's tools and a box of books she'd been hauling since she was a girl. She put them on the shelf next to my survey maps. They looked right there. I asked her once that first summer what she'd expected to find that night, when she drove past the Enders and came to my gate in the rain. She thought for a moment, then she said, a man who was still trying. She looked at me. I found that. I didn't answer, didn't need to. She was out in the morning before me most days. I'd come down and she'd be at the window with her coffee, looking at the land, the light coming up over the east ridge that had come up over this land every morning of my adult life, and that I had, somewhere in those bad years, stopped really seeing. She saw it. She'd stand there and just look at it, and sometimes she'd say something specific. The way the frost was on the lower pasture, the herd moving along the fence line, a hawk working the updraft off the creek draw, and I'd stand beside her and look at the same thing and find I was seeing it too. That was the gift of it, not that she saved me exactly or that she fixed anything. She didn't do either of those things alone. But she saw the place the way it deserved to be seen. She saw me the way I'd worked to deserve to be seen. And when you've been a long time without that, without someone next to you who looks at what you've built and finds it worth looking at, when it comes back whole. The deed is still on the shelf. I keep it there on purpose. Not to remind myself of the night I almost lost the place, but to remind myself of the night she walked in out of the rain, hat dripping, and looked at it and looked at me and saw exactly what was there. That's the whole of it. That's how it went.